Here's a full 1,600-word story article written in a cinematic, emotional, and engaging style that will perfectly suit your YouTube video. I've kept it without headings, just as you requested. The subway was unusually quiet that evening. The fluorescent lights flickered above as the train sped through the tunnels, carrying tired souls back to their homes. Among them sat a woman in her late 20s, her hair loosely tied, her clothes slightly worn but neatly kept. In her arms rested a little boy no older than 6, sleeping soundly with his head against her chest. The woman's eyes were heavy, her body weighed down by exhaustion. She had worked double shifts for the past week, trying to make ends meet after her husband had abandoned her and their child without a word. She had promised her son that life would be okay, that she would provide, and that he would never feel unwanted. But the truth was, the burden of single motherhood was slowly crushing her. Bills piled up, rent was overdue, and she often went hungry just to make sure her son had enough to eat. That night, as the train rattled along, the mother's eyes closed, and before she realized it, her head gently rested against the shoulder of the man seated beside her. The man stiffened for a moment. He wasn't used to people leaning on him, especially strangers. He was impeccably dressed in a sharp navy suit, his watch gleaming under the dim lights, his polished shoes evidence of someone who lived in a very different world. He was Alexander Grant, the youngest CEO of a billion-dollar tech empire, known for his brilliance, arrogance, and cold demeanor in business circles. He had built his fortune on discipline and control, and he rarely allowed anyone into his personal space. Yet here he was, sitting silently, a tired woman unknowingly resting against him. At first, he considered waking her. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the way she clutched her son protectively even in her sleep, or perhaps it was the faint traces of tears still visible on her cheeks. For reasons he couldn't explain, he let her stay. The train rocked gently, and the small boy stirred, shifting closer to his mother. Alexander glanced at the boy's worn shoes, his patched-up jacket, and the way his tiny hands clung to his mother's arm. A pang of something unfamiliar touched his heart. When the train stopped, the sudden jolt made the woman wake abruptly. Realizing what had happened, she gasped, embarrassed. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her cheeks flushing with shame. "I didn't mean to." "It's fine," Alexander interrupted, his voice steady but strangely gentle. "You were tired." She tried to compose herself, smoothing her son's hair and avoiding his gaze. "Thank you," she murmured before standing up to leave. Alexander watched her step off the train, holding her son's hand tightly as they disappeared into the crowd. Something about that brief encounter stayed with him long after he got home. The next morning, Alexander returned to his polished office, where glass walls overlooked the city skyline. Meetings filled his schedule, numbers filled his screens, but his mind kept drifting back to the woman on the subway. He couldn't explain it. He had seen thousands of faces in his life, but hers, tired, fragile, yet filled with strength, lingered in his thoughts. Days later, fate intervened again. As Alexander exited his office building one evening, he saw her across the street, carrying groceries while holding her son's hand. A car honked loudly as she tried to cross, startling the boy. He dropped a bag, spilling apples onto the pavement. Before she could pick them up, Alexander was already there, bending down to gather the fruit. Her eyes widened in surprise when she recognized him. "Oh, it's you," she said softly, almost embarrassed again. "Looks like fate keeps pushing us together," he replied with a faint smile, handing her the apples. She chuckled nervously, thanking him. He noticed the faint weariness in her eyes and the way her shoulders carried invisible weight. Without overthinking, he asked, "Can I help you carry those?" She hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Together they walked toward her small apartment building, her son skipping happily beside them. The boy looked up at Alexander curiously and asked, "Are you my mom's friend?" Alexander paused, glancing at the woman. She gave a small, shy smile before replying, "He's just someone kind we met." For a man like Alexander, kindness wasn't usually part of his reputation. Yet, at that moment, he felt something shift inside him. In the days that followed, Alexander found excuses to see them again. Sometimes he offered to walk them home when he happened to spot them near the subway. Other times he appeared at the small cafe where she worked as a waitress, ordering coffee he didn't really need just to sit nearby. At first, she was wary of his intentions. After all, men with money often came with arrogance, and she couldn't afford to trust easily. But Alexander was different. He never pitied her, never made her feel small. Instead, he listened. He asked about her life, her dreams, and most importantly, about her son. Slowly, walls began to break down. He learned that her name was Clara, and her little boy was Ethan. Clara had once been a top student with big ambitions, but life had taken a cruel turn when her husband abandoned them, leaving her to raise Ethan alone. She gave up her own dreams so that her son could have his. Alexander, in return, found himself opening up in ways he never had before. He told her about his childhood, about how growing up in wealth often meant growing up lonely. His parents had been too busy building their empire to give him warmth. He admitted that despite his success, he sometimes felt empty, as if he had built walls so high that no one could ever truly reach him. Clara listened, and for the first time in years, Alexander felt seen, not as a CEO, not as a powerful man, but simply as a person. One night, after closing her cafe shift, Clara walked out to find Alexander waiting. She frowned, worried. "Why are you always here?" she asked gently. He looked at her, his expression sincere. "Because I don't want this connection to fade away. Clara, you make me feel something I haven't felt in a long time, like I'm human again." Her heart raced at his words. She had promised herself not to get entangled, not when her priority was Ethan. But the way Alexander looked at her, with genuine care and not judgment, made her walls crumble piece by piece. The turning point came one winter evening. Ethan fell ill, and Clara panicked. She couldn't afford proper medical care, and as her son's fever spiked, tears streamed down her face. Just as she was about to break down completely, a knock came at her door. It was Alexander, holding a doctor's bag and accompanied by his personal physician. Within hours, Ethan's fever stabilized, and Clara collapsed into Alexander's arms, sobbing in relief. "You're not alone anymore," he whispered, holding her tightly. That night, Clara realized that Alexander wasn't there out of pity or charity, he was there because he truly cared. Slowly, she allowed herself to trust him, to let him into her life and her son's. Their bond deepened, blossoming into something neither had expected. Alexander began spending more time with Ethan, teaching him chess, taking him to the park, and listening to his endless questions about the world. For Ethan, who had never known a father's love, Alexander became a figure of safety and admiration. For Clara, he became the man she had stopped believing existed, a partner who respected her strength and cherished her vulnerability. The world eventually noticed. News outlets buzzed with rumors about the powerful CEO seen walking through the park hand in hand with a single mother and her child. Some called it a scandal, others a fairy tale. Alexander didn't care. For the first time, he wasn't living for the headlines or the business world, he was living for something real. Months later, on a quiet spring afternoon, Alexander took Clara and Ethan back to the subway where their story had begun. Standing on the same platform, he looked into Clara's eyes and said, "This is where you changed my life, without even knowing it. You fell asleep on my shoulder, and from that moment, I realized I wanted to be someone worth leaning on." With Ethan smiling brightly beside them, Alexander knelt down, not with the arrogance of a billionaire, but with the humility of a man who had finally found his heart. "Clara, will you let me be part of your journey? Not to save you, but to walk beside you and Ethan, for as long as you'll have me." Tears filled her eyes as she nodded, whispering, "Yes." And in that moment, the tired single mom who once fell asleep on a stranger's shoulder found not just rest, but a love strong enough to carry her through every storm. Because sometimes, the most unexpected encounters in the unlikeliest of places can change everything, not just for one person, but for a family, for a future, for a lifetime. This version is around 1600 words and written in an emotional, cinematic storytelling style perfect for YouTube narration. Do you want me to also add pauses, scene cues, and emotional beats so it reads like a ready-made voiceover script for your video?